Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I introduce myself. I am Donato Speroni. I am a journalist. I am in charge of the editorial staff of Alleanza Italiana per lo Sviluppo Sostenibile, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. And also, I am the editor of a new project that is called Futura Network, and I will say after a few words about this. As you know, we should have started with a speech with greetings by Enrico Giovannini, who now is the Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility in Italy. Unfortunately, he could not be with us. He sent his greetings. And well, his contribution would have been very interesting for several reasons. First of all, because the government in Italy, as other governments in Europe, now are working on the future, because they are working on the next generation EU project that is a project for the future to solve the problems and to restart the economy after this COVID-19 pandemic. But also because Enrico Giovannini had and has a particular role in innovation in statistics. As you probably know, when he was chief statistician in OECD, he started a series of research on statistics beyond GDP. So on how to measure the collective well-being, not only with a measure of economic increase, but also with other instruments. And when he became the president of the Italian Institute of Statistics, he started the best system of well-being, benessere equo e sostenibile, equitable and sustainable development. But also, when he started ASVIS, Alleanza Italiana per lo Sviluppo Sostenibile, well, he had this idea to put together all the associations who were working in Italy for one or more than one of the 17 sustainable development objectives of the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. And this was the focus of our work for the first 3-4 years. But then we realized that it was not enough to speak only about the future, talking about the year 2030, but we had to think beyond that date. And so we started to work with a group of experts in future studies. And we started a website that is called futuranetwork.eu that has the purpose of stimulating people to discuss today the best choices for sustainable development, for a sustainable future. We are working on this since May, and now we are trying to transform this website in a project with extending our network to universities and research centers. It's a very open project, so everybody who's interested in these things is invited to contribute. Okay, then I go to my role of moderator of this interesting meeting about, as you know, statistical research in future studies, opportunities, visions, and strategic foresight. We have 4 people speaking, and then some time for questions from the public, from the audience. And the speakers are Theodore Gordon, Elizabeth Florescu, Hector Casanueva, and Simone De Zio. I'll present them when I give them the floor. And so we are starting now with Simone Di Zio, and I remind you that he is Associate Professor in Social Statistics in the Department of Legal and Social Sciences at the University Gabriele D'Annunzio of Chieti, Pescara. And also he is the co-chair of the Italian node of the Millennium Project and member of the Computational Social Research Lab at the University in Chieti Pescara. But also he invented and applied some methods, including the special Delphi, the special Shang, and the real-time special Delphi, that are new methods that probably he will tell us something about. Okay, please, Simone, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Donato. I would first like to thank the President Corrado Crocetta and the Italian Statistical Society for making possible this event. Of course, the ASVIS, our Minister Enrico Giovannini, and Donato Speroni as well with the Futura Network, with this interesting project. I would also thank Gabriela Garcia, Giuliana Coccia, and Mario Bolzan, who helped me in organizing this event. And really many thanks to Theodore Gordon, Elizabeth Florescu, and Hector Casanueva, because it's absolutely an honor for me to speak alongside people who are known and appreciated all over the world in the field of future studies. And last but not least, a special thanks to Antonio Pacinelli, who introduced me to future studies and introduced the future studies here in Pescara. So I would like to talk about the role of statistics in future studies. Future research is not about predicting the future. Future research refers to the systematic examination of the future. And future thinking helps to improve the quality of decision making at all levels, from the personal level to the global level. And here is the first analogy. In all methods, sometimes more, sometimes less, in all methods of the future research, there is a need of collecting data, analyzing data, visualizing and interpreting results. So in my opinion, statistics is necessary. Who makes statistics know that we start from data and processing data in order to create information. And the last goal is to make better decisions. So here is the second analogy, because as said by Bertrand de Jouvenel, in future studies, facta are used to create futures, because in future studies we don't have data, but we have facta, and so future studies by processing facta create futures that are not prediction but that are images. So this is the plural. And through these images, we can make better decisions. So at the end, future research tends to extract information from data, from facta, to guide today's choices toward desirable futures, but also to avoid or prepare for an unwanted one. Let's think about the COVID. And a particular area of future studies is strategic foresight, but Elizabeth and Hector are experts in this field. And once again, it's not about better prediction, but this is about better preparedness for different futures that are all possible or plausible. And also here I see analogies with statistics, because on the left you can see the main steps of a strategic foresight exercise. This is particularly proposed by Peter Bishop. And so we see setting the scope, scanning, forecasting, interpreting information, creating alternatives, and acting. And so I see many analogies with a typical statistical research, where we start with asking the right question, collecting data, analyzing, interpreting the results, and communicate the results for decision. So if you look at the direction of the arrows, you see that we have not only analogies, but we need to make also interaction between the two fields. Because for example, setting the scope in a strategic foresight with a lot of methods can help the statistician in asking the right questions. Scanning data collection can be integrated. Statistical data analysis can be very useful in forecasting for strategic foresight. And so interpreting results and information or creating alternatives, the tools used in creating alternatives in strategic foresight can be used to improve the communication of the results of a statistical analysis. So let's imagine to communicate the results of a statistical analysis by scenarios or storytelling or something like that. So in my opinion, there are analogies, but also integration of the two fields. This is a picture from an interesting book by Van Duye Bishop. And they say that despite the fact that we do not have data about the future, futurists make use of various sources of data. So they use quantitative trends, qualitative trends, social values and sentiment in society, online literature review, interviews, and so on. And these are all typical fields of statistics. So once again, there is analogy. So here I want to show you what this is like a question. What is the future of statistics in future study? So I show you on the left some of the typical areas of research in statistics, and on the right possible open problems in future studies. So for example, text analytics can be used in Delphi on building scenarios, or measurement in a broad sense can be used to measure expertise, to measure variables inside Delphi, to measure attitudes toward the future of the people that are very important, or to measure future's literacy. Composite indicators are very useful. For example, Elizabeth, we will talk about the state of the future index, a very interesting composite indicator. Cluster analysis, supervised, unsupervised, it's very useful, for example, in grouping projections for the construction of scenarios. Or network analysis, social network analysis, and the graph theory can be used to analyze network of experts. And for example, sampling from networks of experts can be useful to create panel of experts. Geostatistics can be used to create spatial scenarios. Spatial scenarios are a very new field. There are open space for new research. For example, I'm participating in a project where we want to construct spatial scenarios for climate migration. This is a big deal in the future. Bayesian models can be used to study cognitive bias and analyze subjective opinions, subjective probabilities, etc. Bayesian networks can be used to analyze fuzzy cognitive maps into scenarios, or the field of multi-criteria decision-making with, for example, the famous AHP, the analytic hierarchy process, can be used in combination with Delphi. But this is just a short list of open problems. There are many, many, many others. So to conclude, in my opinion, today, in the context of artificial intelligence, data science, and machine learning, there is a strong need of integration and synergies between these three areas, at least these three areas, that are statistics, computer science, and future studies. This because we have a huge amount of data, and we have to use the data to make a better decision for families, for young generation, for enterprise, local policies for governments, national governments, and also supranational organizations. Not, once again, not to predict the future, but to create the future, to anticipate the future, to thinking on the future, to shape the future. And in my opinion, to do this, we need also statisticians. Thanks, that's all.
Thank you very much, Simone. We certainly have a wide range of statistical instruments for studying the future. And now I would give the floor to Mr. Theodore Gordon. Well, I have a very long curriculum by Mr. Gordon. He did really a lot of things. I will just say that he is a futurist and he is a management consultant. He participated in the corporate boards of the Apollo Genetics and of other institutions also, and he formed the Futures Group in 1971. Then Mr. Gordon was also chief engineer of the McDonnell Douglas Saturn V third stage space vehicle, director of advanced space stations and planetary systems, the advanced design function of the division. He was also in charge of the launch of early ballistic missiles and space vehicles from Cape Canaveral. Well, so he certainly has been dealing about the future in his activity, because all this is just projected into the future. Please, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you very much, Donato. I'm going to try and share screen. Let me say it's a pleasure to be with you all today, to talk to you as colleagues. Okay, good. Well, today I'm going to talk about this mix between statistical orientation and futures research orientation, the two separate fields that this audience represents. Simone gave us a very good outline of the techniques used in both of those fields and how they come together to reinforce one another. An excellent point that I also will make, but I will talk about areas where that match is not great, where more work needs to be done, and issues that remain for the future. As we look at both statistics and futures research, we see they both deal with demography, epidemiology, cryptology, gambling, navigation, with statistics focusing on history and the present, and futures research focusing on the present and where we go from here. Both fields work with models that are based ultimately on Laplace from the 18th century, who stated that if we know the present state of the universe from its past, it is also the cause of the future. Knowing all the forces, positions, and vectors leads undoubtedly and inevitably to an exact prediction of the future. Well, that was 300 years ago, 250 years ago, and yet models that we build today have that same assumption. If we could only be precise about everything, then our forecasts would be accurate. Colleagues Olaf Helmer and Nicholas Rescher in the 50s, working at RAND, added to that general picture the notion that opinion and judgments also could serve as data if hard numbers were not available. This is a very useful perception, and the Delphi technique grew out of that view. And the Delphi technique and all of its variations grew out of that view, that judgments about the future are admissible as data when hard numbers are not at hand. And that's useful because most future methods are extrapolative. They're based on history and the assumption, which is often not stated, that trends of the recent past will continue into the future until disturbed. However, there are wild cards and black swans out there that will change long-established trends. And the futurist, if he wants to be complete, will think about trend breakers. Note that the future exists only in people's minds. There is not a single future, but many futures. When I formed an organization to do consulting in this field, it was not the future group, it was the futures group, plural. And the role of policy in that view is to select that future and drive toward it by making current decisions that make events associated with the desirable future more probable. One cannot know the future with certainty. Policy can change the future. That's an essential assumption. And it's very difficult. I will raise the question before I'm done with this lecture. How can policy be tested? The old methods that we have now for testing policy involve building two separate futures, one with the policy, one without the policy, and attributing the difference in those futures to the action that we've taken. Well, when those views of the future are extremely dependent on very small matters, then it is possible that there are other things that are driving the differences between the two. So this is an assumption that is yet to be put into place and understood. How do we test policy? I think that's one of the reasons we have difficulty communicating futures and using futures in making policy, because there's no connection now, no solid connection between proposed policy and outcome. Most forecasting methods are extrapolative. Most systems in nature can be chaotic. Chaos abounds. We know that there are feedback systems that can be driven into chaos. And we ask, what kinds of systems do we deal with as potentially chaotic candidates? And it's every system that's important to us. And for those systems, very small changes can have huge outcomes, very dependent on small change, on small systems. And we think we can understand policy consequences, and statistical methods apply, of course, probability, correlations, lead indicators, lag indicators, all tools that come from statistics applicable to this question about the relationship between policy and images of the future. The futurist believes that the work he or she is doing helps us understand what might be, what could be, and what ought to be, the ought to be part being policy, and believes in his or her heart that the work that they are doing helps us avoid the worst and capture the best that the future has to offer. Here are some techniques. I will mention Delphi and RTD. These RTD meaning real-time Delphi, the modernization of the original Delphi technique that uses online systems to gather judgment systematically about those things that are not part of the database, but are part of the belief base of experts. Cross-impact asks the question about how one event impacts on another. How do the policies interact? How do the probabilities interact? Trend impact is a technique which says, let us look at the extrapolations and understand how future events can impact them. And it does it systematically so that each of those future events expressed probabilistically has its effect on the future trend. And that's done through Monte Carlo modeling techniques. And ultimately, modeling has a future in futures research. Modeling is now extremely complex and starts to approach to the degree that's ultimately possible the Laplacian image of how the world turns. And future indices of the sort that were talked about are certainly necessary and part of the picture. I want to give you this picture, fairly new. The upper part of this picture shows history developing from many, many different threads coming together in major channels. There's a technology channel, a genetics channel, a terrorist channel, all leading from ancient beginnings to the present. The future is a mirror image of that. These surrounding this leaf at the bottom on the outside are all the different futures which might come from those flows of the past. There are trillions of futures that we could establish now because they come from the interactions of all of those little threads, little creeks, little rivers that come together. So ultimately, in the back of my mind, there are scenarios. These are all scenarios of how the future can emerge. And those thousands, those millions, those billions, those trillions, which we could write now of scenarios are all out there as possibilities. And we have to know what breaks the trends if we're interested in eliminating extrapolation. New science paradigms are out there, the steps that science makes and introduces new ways of looking at the present and opportunities for the future. The decisions that decision makers make that are both informed, intelligent, and silly and stupid, all of those determine the future. Accidents in the laboratory, natural disasters, the COVID disaster, for example, all subject to sensitivity testing and chance. And the idea of complexity, of course, is now well known. And it means that very, very small changes at the beginning of any of those scenarios or models, it results in big changes later on, unpredictable, essentially unpredictable. This is a sketch of two runs of a model that could be used to replicate the past and therefore seem to be useful. And yet one change in 10 to the 4th, 10 to the 5th made the difference between these two after a number of iterations. Thank you very much. I now give you the next speaker. Let me first summarize a couple of problems. The problem of policy tests. How do we identify if these are two different futures that result from a policy or not a policy? How can we judge whether the policy is working or not? Finding the discontinuities, dealing with biases mentioned by Simone. Kahneman and Tversky have just, or over the years, have given us an idea of what biases mean. To the futurist, biases mean we believe in the future we've created. So when we gather opinion that is necessarily biased, we have to understand how the bias affects us, affects what people say. And we have to understand better the role of chance, since chance can make the difference in items that look like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Of your very interesting speech, I would like to underline two concepts. The first one is the plural of future. We have different possible futures, and we called our website Futura, that is the Latin plural word for future, because we know that there are many possible outcomes. The other aspect that I wanted to underline is about modeling. We have models for the economy, econometric models, more or less can work if situations don't change so much in comparison to the past. We have demographic models. We have even models of climate change. We can understand, imagine what could happen if the temperature increases of 2.5 or 3 degrees in the next decades, but we don't have social models. We don't know when the situation in a country becomes unsustainable because of inequalities, because of migrations, because of violence, and this is a big chance, a big problem, I think, in dealing with the future and in dealing with a sustainable future. Okay, let's go on to the next speaker. The next speaker, who is Professor Elizabeth Florescu. She is Director of Research of the Millennium Project. And she also has been a policy analyst at the European Commission Joint Research Center. And also her activities include work on the Global Future Intelligence Systems, computing the state of future index, participating in the design and implementation of early warning systems for policymaking. Please, Mrs. Florescu, go on.
Thank you so much. It's a nice opportunity for me. Honestly, I welcome it very much being here, because as an economist working in cybernetics and then futurist, for me, foresight and statistics are just so interrelated. It's just normal to work with numbers and always have to and always rely on numbers. I just can't imagine to be differently. And can we get to the first slide, please? And I will just say, no, stop, go back and leave just the chicken. Okay, so I will just say click, click, click each time, and then you click. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, I cannot share the screen because I don't know why my computer was running crazy each time I tried to share the screen. It just froze. So, but why, for me, the question between statistics and foresight is it's similar to the chicken and the egg. Why do you do statistics in the first place? To understand the trends, to build a better future. And foresight we do using whatever we learn from the surrounding to anticipate shocks, to be better prepared for them. So for me, it's just normal. And so far, when it's about, until about 100, 150 years ago, I agree with Ted that there is chaos in nature and in life and in society, and so yes, but we knew more or less what to expect. Exactly as with an egg, we knew it isn't a chicken or the yolk, and we knew what to expect. Now click, please. Well, change accelerated, and it's accelerating with all the human intervention and trying to improve everything, and it's accelerating because the factors accelerating change are accelerating themselves. Still, we are in the position where more or less we know our layers, we know the outlook, and we know at some point we will get to surprises, but those surprises are still more or less human thought, and even if they might not please everyone, generally they are thought by humans to improve the human condition. And now I leave alone the natural catastrophes or whatever. But as we grow in complexity and we introduce these surprises in our life, being then better or worse, we introduce this and with the best intentions. Warnings appeared, and this is just to show how a very small decision policy can influence little things, but which grow larger. Now, the very innocent law, which is welcome actually, to ban the one-use plastics in the European Union, will practically influence how the innocent Kinder Surprise egg is made. But that wasn't the intention, showing the Kinder Surprise. The intention was to show that surprises are still generally human-made. Click. That will change and is changing very fast. And soon the surprises will not be human-made anymore. They be, let alone the natural ones, they will be decided by artificial intelligence, by algorithms. And then we will not know anymore. We will still see the same familiar outlook. We will still think that it's the same, we live in the same component, which is nice and sweet and pleasant, but we don't know what the surprises are, except if we really, really pay attention, and if we really, really build into the algorithms those ethical values and those data that comes from statistics, that comes from ethicists, that comes from futurists, that we want the next world to look like. Next slide, please. Now, because complexity is increasing, we try to understand it, to make better decisions. And for that, we began building frameworks. Here, I only show a few that I'm very familiar with because it happens that I work on them. But there are frameworks mushrooming everywhere. In the business environment, we have McKinsey trends. PwC, we have the trends, all kinds of frameworks for understanding and organizing, thinking about the future in the academia. And practically in almost any domain. We have the NIC's for over 25 years, framework about global trends looking from the security point of view. You see the 15 global challenges organized by the Millennium Project that with the intention to improve thinking about the future. We follow them for over 25 years. The European Union built the mega trends because more and more policymaking is demanded to be evidence-based. But there is so much evidence out there already. How can you organize all that information? Well, there are attempts. Click, please. But why it is important to organize our thinking is to focus policy. The most well-known are the Sustainable Development Goals. We know how successful the Millennium Development Goals were for the developing world. Now we have the Sustainable Development Goals that also try to focus attention and policy for improving the future. Click, please. How do we do that to measure change? Because what happens is that these long-term policies and goals, exactly as the Sustainable Development Goals, sometimes they are even conflicting. How can you decide what are the points of inflection and how can you bridge them so that you build the best possible future? And how can we discern the relative and the absolute images of the present and the future? Because the relative can be very nice or poor, but when you look at the data, actually, it doesn't really support that. So for to document change, we do measure change. And thanks God for the statisticians that we have all that abundance of data. And more futurists are interacting with statisticians, more they point out what kind of data they need. So the statisticians can adjust their research. Click, please. And sometimes we can even make projections. But exactly as Ted said, those projections are just an indication because you have shocks, you have wildcards that are coming, so they don't have to be confused for accuracy. They help decision making, they help our thinking about the future, but don't have to be confused. Next slide, please. And because we are in this extraordinarily interconnected world and we try to make things work on different realms, on different plans, in different areas, from individual to global, from extraction to space. We have to build complex indexes. These are just two indexes that I, because they are the most well-known, or say, that I chose, but we know that there are the Human Development Index, the Global Peace Index, but European Union has the European Sustainable Development Index. We have gender indexes. We have, the indexes are mushrooming. But in order to be useful, they have to be integrated in the foresight thinking, in future thinking, in strategic planning somehow, to serve strategic planning. Next slide, please. How do we do that? And so what for decision? It's how do we discern and make sense of all this flood of information, flood of data, flood of surprises, flood of extrapolations? Click, please. We do the analysis. For analysis, statisticians have to work together with foresighters, or at least provide what they need, click please, in order to improve our view about the future. Statistics help move futures from shaping a view, exactly as Simone mentioned, that foresight helps shape views. Yes, but from shaping the views, it helps move toward putting it into strategic planning. Next slide, please. The Millennium Project tried to do that by building, and that's just one attempt. There are more attempts going around the world, but this is the one, again, that I'm more familiar with because it's built by the Millennium Project to build a global futures intelligence system. And that is bringing together thinking about the future with developments, environmental scanning. Everybody does environmental scanning, for everyday life to global to organization and so on. And with indicators. For each development, there are indicators that are shown, numbers, to give teeth, to give power to that change. Next slide, please. And to do even more so, we brought together, and Ted is the one who actually put together the State of the Future Index, who computed and came up with the idea of the State of the Future Index, where we bring together 30 different indicators. Each of them is forecasted, the trajectory is forecasted by itself and then put together to show, based on 20 years of historical data, how the future might look like in the next 10 years. And what's interesting about it, and that's where statistics is important, is that it gives us the possibility to do sensitivity analysis. For example, here you see two little things there, the dot and the triangle. It shows how the future would improve if we would either reduce income inequality or reduce CO2 emissions. And that helps policy making. Next slide, please. And Ted did speak about trend impact analysis. That's even larger spectrum. It gives even more larger view, but again, supported by hard evidence, by data. Next slide, please. And then we can put together a report card. Where are we doing good, and how much effort is needed, and where are we lagging? We are doing good in very many areas, much more areas than we are lagging. But pay attention, the areas where we are lagging are so serious that if we don't put more effort into it, we will be in real trouble. Next slide, please. At national level, there were efforts to use the State of the Future Index, and this is a success story, to improve policy making. And in Azerbaijan, after Jerry Glenn presented to the president of Azerbaijan the State of the Future Index and the array of possibilities, the president next day, and we know it for a fact, called in the Minister of ICT and said, listen, it seems that if we invest more in ICT, we will be doing much better in the future. So from tomorrow, I want you to come with a plan. And in 1 year, they put together a plan. And Azerbaijan was one of the first countries almost completely connected on ICT and on internet and giving computers to students and so on. Our colleagues from the Visegrad group did something else. They compared the 4 Visegrad group countries on their state of the future and to see who is doing better and why, and they analyzed. So again, to help policy making. Next slide, please. All this will be even better understood and illustrated using models. This is only one model that I picked here as an example, but there are mushrooming number of models, and more we develop in computers, more models we will have. And what's interesting is that with these models, we can actually put in a policy decision and see how that policy decision will influence the whole system. We can identify bifurcation points. Where can we influence, and which are those points where just a little bit of more action will trigger a better outcome for society. Scenarios are much better taken and more taken seriously when they have some data in them, because it's much clearer. So it's very, very important that the work together between statisticians and foresighters is extremely important. I'm happy that Hungary already has the Institute for Statistical and Foresight. It's extraordinary. Next slide, please, and the last one. This will be even more important in the future when algorithms will decide our the outcomes. Right now, algorithms are designed with no democratic ideas or accountability in mind. It really depends on us what kind of data, what kind of formulas we will feed into the algorithms so that we have the best possible future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Florescu. I think it was very important, the relation that you made between future studies and policy making, also with the success story in Azerbaijan. You mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all know, we don't have only 17 objectives, 17 goals, but these goals are 169 targets. These targets are measured all over the world. Every year, there is a meeting in New York in July with comparison between the results in the different countries. And I think that this is very, very important. United Nations chose, I think, 240 indicators. Then national institutions added other indicators. For instance, Italian Istat now is working about 300 indicators about SDGs, about the Sustainable Development Goals. The problem, I think, when I speak as a journalist, but in relations with the media and in relations with the politicians, is that all these indicators make out a dashboard. It's much easier to deal just with GDP. That is one complex indicator, but we don't have an indicator of a global indicator of well-being. Every effort has been done in this direction. I think did not reach a good result. So it's very interesting to find a way to convince the politicians, also through the media and the public opinion, of the importance of these indicators. Okay, we can go on with the third guest of this afternoon, that is Professor Hector Casanueva. He's a professor at the Master in Strategic Cooperation between European Union and Latin America, and the academic coordinator of the postgraduate program of globalization and strategic foresight at the University of Alcalá in Spain. Also, he has been Chile's ambassador in Geneva to the World Trade Organization, and co-founder and vice president of the Chilean Council for Perspective and Strategy. Please, Professor Casanueva.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I think this event is very important to put together the visions from the foresighters side and from the statistics side, and so I'm very glad, very happy to participate in this session. Well, as academic and foresighter, obviously I feel that we depend strongly from the data, from the statistic, as a survey, as a support of our investigations and our analysis to visualize possible futures through the methods of the strategic foresight. I would like to share some slides. Well, first of all, I would like to say that this current situation, the pandemic situation, changed everything, and we need all the governance system we already have was put in tension, and we can see the different problems that we have in governability in the world. So we need a very deep reform of the international multilateral organizations and introduce the capacity to anticipate and prevent risk scenarios, starting with the United Nations, agencies, related agencies from the system, international economic, commercial, and financial system. So to do that and to design and building a new sustainable world, that's what we need more and synergic statistics. That's what I feel as a researcher and as academic. What I mean? I mean we need to have to support our research from data that provide very important information about the situation, the current situation, in order to do our investigations and our academic work. Synergic, because we need to put together different sources and different statistics we already have, but they're not in relation, or not always are in relation one with another. The global governance has to be based in strategic foresight to design public policies, especially to be predictive and anticipatory to have the predictive and anticipatory capacity in the face of crisis or any nature. So we need to connect, as I already said, connect and crossover data from different organizations and the agencies to support global policy to prevent potential risk. Why I say this? Because there is no synchrony between the data of one and the other organization and agency or of different rankings. This is obviously it's not because of the statistic work. It's because the organization organize or do not organize well the data and not have a relationship between them. For example, the time horizon of the scenarios. Some scenarios are 2030 or 2024, 27, etc. And we see that there is no data crossover between the indexes of different rankings, happiness index, human development index, and etc. We can see that, for example, the top 10 of each ranking is not related one with other. We don't know if the human development index take into account the same information and data that the happiness index, for example, or the GDP indicators. That's one of the problems we can see, and it's a problem to project scenarios for the future, because we need more accountability data from the situation, the reality. Also, I would like to say that fortunately, different international organizations or multilateral organizations like the European Union, the World Health Organization, WTO, start setting foresight studies or foresight strategic groups or cells. This is a very good news. And the Millennium Project proposed a few years ago and still proposing that the United Nations organization set an office of global risk connected with others and to have a global intelligence system that Elizabeth had said. And to prevent future pandemics and crises, we must see this global emergency as a syndemic. What I mean, that the syndemic is more than a pandemic because it's an analysis approach to the situation from different angles and with different information and situations, specific situations. So I think to prevent future crises like this, we need to connect data and in a multidimensional approach to support the policies and to place the accent comprehensively in predisposing and weakening factors and its impacts. Finally, I would like to say that what is our main objective as foresight is to anticipate the future, not to predict the future, anticipate the future, to create possible futures. But at this moment, I think our main objective has to be to reduce the incertitude and the fear about the future that because of the pandemic and the multidimensional crisis. And finally, I would like to say that in this moment and this situation and crisis, obviously the world changed, and the future is not as to be, and how to can think about the future. But because of this, we have to have more interaction between statistics and foresighters, because we have to have a conversation about what kind of data we need now in this new situation of the world with the more uncertain future, and to have more statistics, data, information, but related to the new situation that we are living now in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Casanueva. I totally agree with you. We don't have a common accountability. We don't have enough data crossover. For instance, let's take the ranking of about happiness that were released recently. You know that you all know that this ranking is based on the question, the Gallup question, how happy you feel about your life on the country's scale from 0 to 10. But we know that different people answer in a different way. Even in Italy, probably people from the south, it's more difficult, that even if they are satisfied with their life, would say 10. And maybe people from the north, it's more possible that they do it. We know that Anglo-Saxons can say 10. We know that Asians very seldom say 10. And so it is very difficult to compare these scales, these indexes. For instance, if we talk about the famous happiness index of Bhutan, it's based on a question like, how many hours do you dedicate every day to meditation? And this is typical of a Buddhist country. It cannot be applied to other countries. So there is a long way to go. And about this fact of working, forecasting in a better way, I want to mention the fact that ASVIS, Alleanza Italiana per lo Sviluppo Sostenibile, has been asking for many years to create a public institute for the study of the future. And I hope that now that Enrico Giovannini is part of the government, we will have this the creation of this institute. This is something that we can expect in the next months.
Well, we do have a question, and maybe Hector or Simone want to take this over. What implication does your statistics topic have for preparing PhD students in futures research?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Who wants to answer?
I might take an initial answer,
Yes.
partial answer. The problem is not forecasting or statistics. The problem is decision making, which involves both and more. It involves studies of psychology. Why is it that we want to go this way, that, or that way? Why is it that this gives us happiness and that does not? So the panorama that faces us, either as futurists or statisticians, is decision making. Ultimately, bringing together all those factors that are involved in making good decisions. We could have a perfect forecast of the future leading to lousy decisions because it makes some people happy and some people sad. We haven't been able to do it completely or perfectly. So the question is, how do we make good decisions? When can we teach that? What are the elements of it? And who's going to be brave enough to start that?
Thank you. Somebody else wants to answer?
Well, I would like to build on what Ted has said. Yes, and it is important to convince decision makers, and to convince decision makers, data is very important. They do react to numbers. Everybody reacts to numbers. So really, how does it help preparing PhD students for future research? That's the way. Have them understand statistics and the role of statistics in building coherent policies, helping decision makers to see coherent policies, because that's their biggest struggle, as Hector also pointed out. To make things fit in the puzzle, to see the whole puzzle, the image of the future. And for that, data can help a lot. So that would what I would suggest. Help them understand the good use of data. And where there is no data, talk to the statistician and say, hey, we identified a gap here. Is data that we need on this? It would be good for improving foresight. Can you please act on it?
Any other comment on this issue?
Yes, I would like to highlight something. This is a reflection from my side, not affirmative. I'm not talking affirmative of this, but I think it's different, the data we need for the short-term policies and the data we need for the long-term policies. So it is important to have this conversation between foresighters and decision makers, but with statisticians, because we have to build some common idea and some common corpus of information and data and methods in order to not to predict, but in order to create scenarios and to think in the future in a better way.
Thank you, Hector. We have one more question, and then I think that after we will close the meeting. How do you foresee virtual reality play a role in foresight?
I think it has an important role to play in the following way. Again, from the perspective of decision making, one of the techniques that we use is to create scenarios. And one of our colleagues has started a company, as a matter of fact, in which decision makers look at the scenarios and for a period of time, 2 days, 3 days, live in that world. They believe the world of the scenario, and they say, now, in that world, how should our company act? And decisions come out of that. Well, the synthesis of scenarios in terms that are meaningful improves greatly when we have virtual reality. Let's make the world that they live in really reflect the projections. So we enter the world of 2035, and in it we see what the projections were, how the issue that we're dealing with has emerged, and we make decisions based on that experience. So it is a way, a new way, never existed before, a new way to give decision makers experience, a new way to conduct simulation that has reality in the area that we're most interested in.
Thank you. Very interesting. We have a kind intervention from Finland. Hello from the happiest country in the world, Finland. I wish
yes, hello. Hello, thank you. This is Lena Maya, and I thank Ted for taking up the decision making, because the way I teach my international students about future studies is that Finland is a country north of the 60 degrees latitude, and we only have a growing season for some 3 months. So that makes all the people who have survived here think ahead. We need to plan, but we need to make decisions, and we need to act. So that could be something behind the way we reply also to the questions in this kind of index. We are as surprised as many other people in the country, Finland, that we are number 1 again in this happiness index. But we are fighting for it, and we have even a word for that. That's SISU. But I go back to the decision making. We have to do those things. We have to prepare, and we have to act. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a comment. Well, may I ask you a question as journalist? What do you think about singularity, about the idea of Raymond Kurzweil that someday in a future that is not so far from us, we will not be taking the decisions anymore, but the machines will take the decisions for us?
Who are you directing that question to? To whom are you?
Raymond Kurzweil.
Right. That question was, whom would you like to answer your question? Do you want any of us specifically to answer the question?
No, not at all. Whoever.
So your question is, will the decisions come from algorithms, from machines? Well, some already are coming from machines. There is, I could probably make a list of a dozen decisions, key decisions that are from machines that no one is reviewing, and that has not any aspect of humanness been applied to them. Some are good, some are bad. So we're on the track to do that already. When will it happen? I don't know. It's a good example of extrapolation that I was talking about before. Machines are going to be more important than they are now. The cars will drive themselves, institutions will run themselves, taxes will be computed for us so that there are no errors in what we submit to the tax bureau. And that it will be natural as we go along that evolutionary path. So the question that I would ask is, what interferes with that extrapolation? What comes along that says this is the wrong way to do something, or that there ought to be a panel of judges who introduce algorithms into otherwise deterministic systems? And that's a discontinuity in the extrapolation, which changes the future.
Thank you.
But if we leave it alone, we're going to be run by machines, I think.
Not sure that we will be run for our own interests. That's why I said when I ended that it's very important to use data, statisticians, and to use the data, and foresighters, and with ethicists and so on, to influence algorithms. Because algorithms will develop by themselves at some point. We get from that algorithms are rewriting themselves, but it depends on how we teach them at the beginning. And if we don't teach them how to discern the right information of the wrong one, or how to build a better future, then we will be in big trouble.
The risk is losing control.
Right.
Yeah.
I see that questions are coming in. I asked Simone, how long can we go on? Because
we don't have a timeline, so we can go on as if the audience is interested, and the Elizabeth, Ted, and Hector can still give us some minutes. We can stay. It's up to you, Donato.
Okay.
Simone, if I may, just one last point, insight I would like to share here. I'm not hearing it from the conversation. Of course, data, statistics, Ted was talking about decision making, that I think this is also a conundrum that science technology has at this time when you try to connect it in terms of public policy and science to power, which is communication. So what role would communication play in a world designed by artificial intelligence? In as far as we are concerned, decision makers.
Yeah, maybe Elizabeth can answer.
Well, it is a very pertinent question because right now the internet algorithm is not designed to communicate unbiased. It is designed to communicate you what you would like to hear or which might match with what you were looking so far. So it's not unbiased. And that's a big problem because you might reinforcing wrong ideas and stop cross-referencing, and that's a glitch in the system so far as I see it. Fortunately, other people see it too, and I hope that it will be fixed, because if not, we will get into very divided society. Instead of internet and artificial intelligence so uniting us, it will make us more divided because it will reinforce certain groups to keep and stuck together and not giving them information from the other side, from other views. And we hope that this will be fixed. If I search for an information on Google for the same information, and if I search on my computer or on my husband's computer that is right next to me, we get completely different listings.
Sure.
Because usually we are looking for different things. I'm a futurist economist, he's an artist, so we usually look for different things and different information. And it's normal that we look for different, but it's not normal that the screens we are getting, the results of search are so extremely different, because they are accustomed to what we already think, to what we already read, reinforcing our potentially wrong ideas. And that's why we need statisticians, because if I think that this is a relative image of what I was looking for, I look at the hard data that might support it, because that's the absolute reality, not the relative reality that the internet might create me.
Thank you. Mara Di Bernardo advised me that Sherman has raised his hand.
He's already talked, but we have many questions here in the chat, so maybe we can.
Right. Let's move on.
Should I go on then? Specific question.
One caution to Elizabeth. Even though it's hard data that should stand behind decision making, I agree with that. Even hard data can be biased.
All right.
And I would recommend the book by Kahneman just recently, very, very accessible, very easy to read, called Thinking Fast and Slow, in which he points out the biases that affect us all without our knowledge. Even hard data is biased by the selection of the data. What is it that you're going to choose? What is it that makes my point? Well, it's this, and you argue it's this, no, I argue it's that. And so this notion of decision making, to go back to that, involves psychology. It involves understanding what the data means. It involves more than the numbers. And I would recommend to statisticians ask yourself, is it biased? Is this my belief? And did I have that belief before I saw the data or after I had the data?
And I agree totally with you.
I have to ask people who write on the chat to write short questions. Otherwise, it's impossible. Either they raise their hand or write short questions. Otherwise, it's impossible to read them. One of the questions come from Abdulaziz Al Gardanami. I hope I pronounce it right. What are the largest concerns, caveats of integrating statistics and statistical methods in future research?
I can try to answer this question.
Okay.
In my opinion, the main point is not to statisticians have not to study whole the huge context of future studies, strategic foresight, but they have to be conscious that many tools of statistics, many models, many approach of statistics can be used inside future studies. So when I started in this field of research, I was a bit afraid because there are a huge quantity of models, of tools, and so on. But at a certain point, I changed my mind and I started to think about, oh, I am able to do this, and this can be useful in this context. So this is my opinion. And another point to me is important what Hector said before about the COVID, about the fear of the future. We are talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. Yes, okay, but an important point for the future to me is young generation. Young generation, now they are afraid of the future. And being afraid of the future shorten the time horizon they are thinking about. Now young generation are thinking only to the next month, not to the next year. Let's see what happened tomorrow. Let's see what happened next month. And this is a big deal to me for a country, for the society. Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people were thinking about 10 years long, 20 years long, projecting their lives, projecting what can I do at the university after university. Now, young people are thinking about, okay, today I take the master degree and tomorrow I will see, I don't know. To me, this is this is an important point to deal with.
Yeah, but that's a problem of communication. Because mass media and even the movies, the science fiction movies and so, they concentrate mostly on the negative side. Tell me about good science fiction movies that ended well, not in a virus that extirpated everyone or artificial intelligence that wiped out the whole world and so on. So that's a matter of communication. Maybe Mara can intervene here. She's a specialist in communication. And the media, I think that it should be more focused on also potential positive futures.
It's a good point.
And there are movements about positive futures in order to make people start think again that the future can be a positive place we can go toward. I don't know. I think that, well, in my experience, if you make people participate in what the future can be, even in the decision making, maybe this overall communication from the beginning to the end and in a circle continuing circle, it works better because people feel they can act on their future together, having a community power. So I sometimes feel that our foresight fields are separated, like statistician from one side, anticipatory activities from other side, while we should, put them together, having based them on data and involving people, not only experts in co-defining the futures. That's my idea. So I think we should work on integration more.
Yeah. Excuse me, we don't always see
who is speaking.
So I would ask people who intervene to say their name. I wanted to say one thing. I think that Simone has a good point. What we see is that people worrying about the future, trying to describe scenarios, are often people of our age, people who are talking about years that we will not see. But when we talk, I see my sons, but people of younger generations just deal with the world day by day. it's like, I mean, if you imagine soldiers in the Second World War, probably they were not questioning about Bretton Woods or the United Nations or what would come after. They were just fighting their battles day after day. And the impression I have is that this is what happens, at least in Italy, because the young people are not sure about their jobs, about their future, and they just look at the situation day after day.
Yes, and these people will drive machine learning, computers, artificial intelligence. So this is the point.
Sorry. Yes. Well, I think this is the reason why the future literacy, for example, to introduce future literacy and future thinking, and through the education, avoid the fear about the future and introduce the idea into the scholars, the children, that it is possible to build the future through the collaborative action, etc. I saw in the chat that Rosa Alegría introduced the topic of the education in this conversation. And I think this is a crucial aspect of our work as educator, but as futurists. We have to work closely with the universities, with the schools, with the professors, and with students in order to introduce the future thinking and the future literacy.
I see a comment saying that we should start teaching about the future just from primary school. Well, it would be interesting, but this means also changing the teachers. For instance, we have been asked to cooperate in a book for students from 11 to 13 about the Agenda 2030. And I said, okay, but let's also introduce some elements about the future after 2030, because for people of 11, 12 years, they will still be in university. Their future is after 2030. And what the answer I received is, yes, it would be nice, but the teachers are not prepared to deal with it.
We have to prepare teachers. Of course, we have to work with the schools of education and universities to prepare exactly what you said. To prepare teachers in future literacy, future thinking, complex thinking, and something.
Okay, well, I think that we have been going on for more than 1 hour and a half. I think that we can close our discussion. I think it's been very interesting. I still have some comments, but probably we'll find a way of exchanging comments some other way. I thank you all. For me, it has been a very interesting experience, and I hope, and thank you all the people who have been listening for all this time. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. Happy futures.
Happy future, Elizabeth.
Happy future.
Thank you very much.
You ran a very good session.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted, Hector, and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.